Welcome to the College Football Insiders. I am Brendan Marcello, joined right now by Richard Johnson. And the coaching carousel, well, as far as head coaches, appears to have stopped, but there's always some late surprises, as we've seen going into the spring months. But for right now, Michigan has its man in Kyle Whittingham. Then also, right before we went on air, Notre Dame head coach Marcus Freeman sent out a tweet pretty much confirming that he's staying put in South Bend instead of entertaining any possibilities in the NFL, which second straight year we've heard about the NFL pop up with Marcus Freeman, and he's had to come out and say, hey, no interest right now. So that's big news as well for Notre Dame. But the big top story here is Michigan finding its man amidst all this chaos there within its athletics department. As you guys know, Sharon Moore fired earlier this month after it was discovered he had an inappropriate relationship with a staff member, a subordinate for that matter, and then, of course, was arrested on 3 charges later that afternoon, including a felony, and he'll face a court date in January. But now the news is Kyle Whittingham, the former Utah coach who stepped down just 2 weeks ago and said, hey, I'm not retiring. I'm open up to any possibilities if it seems to be the right fit. And boy, at least to me, Richard, this just seems like the about as good of a hire as Michigan could have been able to achieve here, considering the circumstances.
Yeah, you have to consider the timing, Brandon. Obviously, if Alabama loses that first round game in the college football playoff, who knows about Kalen DeBoer? Who knows if Michigan would have actually tried to more strongly pursue Kalen DeBoer and go down that route. You've done great reporting on the Kenny Dillingham route. It didn't really seem like there was any real fire to the smoke there. And then, there were some rumors about maybe Jeff Brom. There were some rumors, obviously, about people in the NFL that they were going to approach. It was my understanding that for most of them, those didn't really get down the road. And so you had this situation where it was very kind of all things quiet on the Western Front. And we're starting to kind of wonder, well, is this going to be bridge coach Biff Poggi situation? Poggi had been telling people inside the building, outside the building, I believe at a press conference, that he'd been signaling that he definitely wanted this job and was kind of openly politicking it for it and kind of talking about the things that he, wanted to see changed and all that kind of stuff. I think, interestingly, omitting the fact that for a lot of the problems Michigan's had in the last few years, Biff Poggi has been on the staff and a very close consigliere to Jim Harbaugh. And so it was interesting the framing that Biff Poggi was trying to do to kind of position himself for the job, both internally and externally. And then, yes, kind of Christmas night, the 26th, you start hearing, oh, well, this Kyle Whittingham thing is very serious. And to me, Brandon, it kind of came out of nowhere. I don't know how it hits you, but I had really not heard much credible smoke about Kyle Whittingham right up until, late on Christmas Day.
Yeah, I'm with you. It was kind of, I don't want to say it come out of nowhere. It's funny, as reporters, you're always reaching out to sources and just even texting out and calling out some really silly questions. It seems like at face value. I was talking to a staffer at Utah the day that Kyle Whittingham said, hey, I'm stepping down. I said, so what's this mean? He goes, probably what you're thinking. I said, well, I'm thinking Michigan. And he laughed at me. And then sure enough, when this news all broke, the staff member texted me back and went, well, here we go.
Well, Brennan,
but that just shows
you're
you.
filling out my lottery tickets from now on. If you called it from that end, that's an incredible pull by you, man.
Well, listen, as reporters, we ask silly questions all the time, like, hey, is this possible? Just to see if something, and sure enough, it's one of those situations where end up proving true. But I think the big thing here, as you mentioned, is, Michigan clearly wants to cut ties from the Harbaugh era, right? There was just so much chaos with that. And Biff Poggi even said at a press conference, goes, listen, the last 5 years have been crazy. It's been nothing but controversy on and off the field for them, from the sign stealing scandal to obviously Sharon Moore, Jim Harbaugh, and Burgergate, all of that stuff. And now you get a clean cut and you bring in a coach who seemingly kind of runs things pretty quietly. I don't know how much of that was Kyle Whittingham and just the fact of the matter that he was working at Utah and had been there for a long time and kind of had set his culture there for the last 20 years, or for that matter, the last 25 years after being on staff there for so long and knowing how everything works there. It's going to be fascinating to see how he holds this roster together, number one, because the big question is going to be, can he keep Bryce Underwood? And I would think as he builds out his staff, we've already got this, and you were on top of this, Jay Hill, the BYU defensive coordinator, is headed to Ann Arbor to be defensive coordinator. Fantastic hire there. He's going to be a head coach here in the next couple of years. Offensive coordinator, though, the target is Jason Beck, the former OC at New Mexico that Kyle Whittingham brought on in Utah this past season and completely revamped the offense. It looks nothing like what you've seen in Utah in the past 10 years. And boy, were they explosive. Top 10 offense in most categories. And then the thing that looks like Michigan fans, the diehard old fashioned ones, is they were number 2 in rushing, which they love to run the ball there at Michigan. But the question is, will they get Jason Beck? There's some question there about obviously his buyout because he's a new hire there, but also Utah, I'm told from sourcing there yesterday, as of yesterday, they're trying to keep him on the current staff going forward. So this is something that's going to play itself out over the next few days because remember, Utah still has a bowl game coming up.
Well, yeah, and Brandon, you got to consider, Morgan Staley's taken over here for the first time as a head coach at Utah. Like, obviously, he's been there for so long under Kyle Whittingham, learned under Kyle Whittingham. But how often do we see coordinator roll into the big chair and things change? Obviously, I'm not comparing Morgan Scalley to Sharon Moore, but you've just seen that it can break bad, even when it looks like the guy on staff is really tailor-made to move into the big chair. And so, yeah, if Kyle Whittingham is going to kind of pull the rug out from under him and potentially take his offensive coordinator, I would imagine Utah would certainly have something to say about that. If I'm Michigan and I'm Bryce Underwood, though, theoretically, that coordinator situation is as good as you can want. Bryce Underwood's got phenomenal physical tools, physical abilities, and his ability to run the ball in addition to throwing is going to make him and is what has already made him such a prized prospect for Michigan and LSU, obviously, last year. And just thinking about that offense and him being in that offense, that style of offense, I think Michigan fans should be salivating at that. I think that'd be the best case scenario for Bryce Underwood because when we talked about potential bridge year for Biff Poggi, you were wondering, is that just going to be kind of punting on one of the few seasons you're actually going to have Bryce Underwood before he, theoretically goes to the NFL?
Yeah, if money's not an issue for Bryce Underwood, which doesn't seem like it because of this giant contract he got, this offensive coordinator, if they were to get him, just seems to be the perfect fit. And I'm not speaking for Bryce Underwood, but if I was Bryce Underwood, I'd stay there because that Jason Beck offense is so fun. They run so many different types of personnel groupings, catch everybody off guard. This could be a Michigan offense that suddenly becomes a top 15 offense next year. And who knows what they can do next season, considering roster retention and what they do in the portal. All right, so that's it for Michigan right now. When we come back after this break, we're going to go through the coaching cycle and look at all these coaches and go through there, grade them, and break down why they were good hires, bad hires, or just hires. Welcome back, College Football Insiders. I'm here once again, with Richard Johnson. We're going to talk about all the coaching changes we've seen at top programs. We so far have had 33, and as we've said in the previous segment, there always seems to be the last 2 to 3 years, maybe a late move that we aren't quite expecting. So we'll see all the way as we go to the spring and after the transfer portal closes in mid-January. But for right now, we've got 33, and we've got 17 jobs that have been filled on the power level. The biggest changes, of course, happening in the SEC, where we had half a dozen changes, which was pretty much expected because there was no changes there last year. And a lot of interesting hires, as you guys know out there. And, of course, the latest being Kyle Whittingham at Michigan. But I went through every single one of these grades as I do every year, hires as I do every year, and graded them. And I'll say this, I'm pretty forgiving with my grades because, let's face it, RJ, no one knows how these things are going to pan out, especially in this day and age of the transfer portal, because it can make a bad coach seem good and a good coach seem great, or vice versa, considering who they're able to get and the finances they have at their bidding right now. But let's start with the coach that's still actually coaching after getting the interim tag pulled off pretty quickly. That's Pete Golding at Ole Miss, the defensive coordinator there, elevated to the permanent head coach after Lane Kiffin skedaddled Oxford for Baton Rouge as Ole Miss got ready for the first round of the playoff. They beat Tulane and very handily, just as they did in the regular season, by the way. And I gave this hire, as it stands right now, a B-, which is actually one of the lowest grades. I think it's the second lowest grade I gave anybody. My reasoning I can get into here at length. But Richard, when you look at Ole Miss and the situation they're in, and for that matter, the future, why is Pete Golding a good hire, or why is it something that might be shaky?
Well, Brandon, they were pretty much just between a rock and a hard place. And some of that was because of the timing of both their game and Lane Kiffin making his decision and John Summerall making his decision to go to Florida. There were a lot of different shoes that were dropping kind of at the same time there. The weekend after Thanksgiving or the couple days after Thanksgiving after Ole Miss played in their Egg Bowl game on Black Friday. So there was a lot going on there. It initially was going to be, okay, well, is this going to be a Pete Golding interim situation, or is this going to be a Pete Golding permanent head coach situation? Obviously, he's the permanent guy. You've heard kind of over the last couple of years that people at Ole Miss really like Pete Golding. I think that some of this is a nod to what the future of these head coaching jobs and roles are going to be, especially at the high level. There's so much we
Yeah,
don't know about any of these guys taking over. We don't know who's going to be on these teams next year. I mean, LSU's entire offensive line, for instance, it says they intend to go in the portal for all intents and purposes. We have no idea what these teams are going to look like. You talk about the finances, which is so key, and then there's the piece of the front offices at all these different places, and the front office is changing around, and a lot of Kyle Whittingham's success is going to hinge on Sean McGee, for instance, their personnel man at Michigan. And it's a similar situation here with Pete Golding in the future. Obviously, this staff that's even going to take the field on Thursday evening for Ole Miss isn't even going to be the staff that Pete Golding's going to have the second their season ends, because so many of those guys are going with Lane Kiffin to Ole Miss. So, incomplete is probably the grade you really want to give every single one of these coaches. But I understand that the B minus and the tinge of pessimism that you may have about this.
Yeah, it's just one of those situations where the timing's awful for Ole Miss, right? And this is a situation where I know, if ands or buts, but this is a job that a year ago, or maybe even a year from now, could have gone to, say, a John Summerall, who ended up going to Florida. But he seemed to be going to Auburn, and then that fell apart because Florida started showing interest in him because Lane Kiffin was ghosting Florida and was going to LSU. And again, as you mentioned, there are a lot of similar size shoes in the SEC. We didn't quite know which feet were going to slip in there. And in fact, those things change within about a 48-hour to 72-hour period there during Thanksgiving week. It's crazy. Let's look elsewhere down here. What's one of these like coaches you see that have changed here that really kind of intrigues you, either in the positive or in the negative?
Well, it's kind of low-hanging fruit there, but the James Franklin thing to me is just fascinating. It's fascinating because of the work that Virginia Tech is going to do around James Franklin to put a different apparatus around him from a financial standpoint, not just for the roster, but just to make it so that Virginia Tech can be something of a modern ACC team, not on the bottom level of the ACC and kind of shackled to the Frank Beamer past, so to speak. James Franklin is just such an intriguing ad here because of that situation there in Blacksburg. And then also it's UCLA. UCLA hiring Bob Chesney. It's a move that I personally really love just because of Chesney's talent, kind of as an evaluator. They're kind of doing a Kurt Signetti kind of role there, where he's a guy who's won at pretty much every level of college football that there is. And he's even put guys into the league from the lower levels of college football, which is something kind of points proof positive to his development. And a place like UCLA that isn't going to have upper echelon NIL resources and rev share resources for football, it's going to be big for them to be able to at least somewhat play money ball with edgewise kind of talents, both in the portal and at the high school level.
Yeah, Virginia Tech reportedly injecting about an average of $50 million in additional money each year in the athletics department under James Franklin there. So they seem to be set up to be very well. And as we saw in signing day, he managed to steal quite a few of his former Penn State recruits and end up finishing with one of their highest rankings they've had there in Virginia Tech recruiting history. And he was only on campus for a few weeks. And then you look elsewhere across, say, the SEC, for example, Will Stein landing at Kentucky. I know that doesn't necessarily make a big splash, but it made a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. He's a Kentucky native, has an exciting offense, and one that has developed, I should say developed, has turned, I would say, great quarterbacks into elite quarterbacks, right? There at Oregon, when you see the likes of a Bo Nix and now a Dante Moore turning into just absolute gamers throughout their tenure here. And then you look at guys like Eric Morris, as you see here on the screen, the North Texas coach, where they go on and they didn't win the American Conference, but they put up such big numbers. And you saw in their bowl game putting up gigantic numbers in their win against San Diego State. He goes to Oklahoma State, and the one that's most intriguing there to me is, does he bring his quarterback Drew Mestemaker, the record-breaking quarterback from North Texas, with him to Stillwater? Because if you do that, all of a sudden you're talking about Oklahoma State. Are they maybe a Big 12 title contender overnight there? And apparently they're putting their resources behind him a little bit more so than what we saw in the latter years under Mike Gundy. Iowa State, of course, lost their big-time coach, Matt Campbell. We've talked for years about whether he'll leave. Maybe he'd end up going to the NFL. Ends up going to Penn State. I end up giving that grade a B+. Just seems to make sense in a lot of ways. And then Iowa State backfilled that on the same day, in fact, by getting Washington State's Jimmy Rogers, who I gave a grade of B+ as well. Real quick, you know what is fascinating about all these changes we've seen? It seems like ADs more so than ever are just on the ready the moment a change is made, even if their coach is leaving them and they weren't necessarily preparing for it. We saw several jobs get filled within 2 to 3 days after their coaches left.
Yeah, Iowa State athletic director Jamie Pollard said something to the effect of he had met Jimmy Rogers at kind of like a meet and greet networking situation, and they had struck up sort of the foundations of a relationship, at least from an initial first impressions standpoint. And so they were at least initially comfortable with each other. And yeah, every AD in this day and age has to have, the list of 5 or so names in the desk drawer just in case something happens. You never know what can happen. And especially your point, Brandon, and I think something to that is on the other end, ADs are looking to hire coaches with experience, head coaches with experience, especially at these high level jobs. Of course, there's a Kentucky that hired Will Stein, for instance. It's not a hard and fast rule, but a lot of these ADs right now are looking to hire a steady hand with head coaching experience. So because of that, if you are an AD, you're going to have to know that my head coach can be poached at any time. So I've got to be at the ready.
It's crazy. We've had, I believe, 93 head coaching changes over the last 3 cycles in the FBS. We only have 136 jobs out there. The changes are fast and furious. They're faster and more furious than they've ever have been in these last 3 years. And it all corresponds with the transfer portal and the implementation of NIL payments for players. You can go see that entire list, and we'll keep updating it in case there's any other changes. 33 head coaching changes in the FBS this year. Grades for every single coach, along with some background there at cbssports.com. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk about the college football playoff quarterfinals all this week. Some exciting matchups after this. College football playoff quarterfinals get underway Wednesday night. That's New Year's Eve night. In Arlington at the Cotton Bowl, Miami and Ohio State. Miami, of course, pulling off, I would say, the biggest win in the first round, beating Texas A&M on the road in a first round where a year ago we didn't have a single road team win, and then this year we flipped it a little bit there. And Miami, of course, pulling off the biggest one. I'm joined by Shahan Jayaraja and Chris Hummer as we break down what we're hearing around these programs and also previewing these matchups. So let's start with Wednesday night. They're in Arlington, Miami and Ohio State. Miami comes in as a 10 seed. Ohio State number 2, of course, after losing to Indiana in the Big Ten championship game with 1 loss entering this. I'll just ask, does Miami have a chance in this? I think there's still doubt about this with Mario Cristobal as the head coach for whatever reason. We're going to continue to concentrate on his late game situational coaching, but also Ohio State's just, you could say is the most talented roster in the country, and some would say should be the favorite to win this national championship game. So, Chris, I'll start with you. What are you thinking of this matchup and what we're going to see from Ohio State?
Well, I think there's an awareness around the Miami program that Miami's going to have to play its absolute best football to have a chance in this game. But that said, I think there is also an awareness that Miami's best football is good enough against Ohio State. I think the most difficult thing about playing Ohio State is the matchup in the trenches oftentimes. In Miami, with its offensive line, which is one of the best in college football, and Miami with its edge rushers, who are 2 of the probably 5 best in college football, and Akeem Mesidor. And I am totally blanking on
Ruben Bain.
Ruben Bain, I'm sorry. I should go live in the darkness for a while like Bain to kind of catch
Yeah.
up on this.
Yeah, you thought
But
darkness was your ally. He was born in it.
exactly. Shout out to the Dark Knight Rises. But yeah, I think Miami with the pieces up front does have the ability to stay in this game up front along the lines of scrimmage and take advantage of Miami. What Miami's going to have to show it can do is one, consistently move the football offensively and take care of the football with Carson Beck. We've seen Carson Beck's kind of some of these tough moments turn into a little bit of a turnover-prone person. He avoided that against A&M. That's critical against Ohio State. And that Miami secondary is going to have to hold up against the best receiver core in college football. I think those are the two key areas for Miami. If they play well enough in those two spots, I think Miami will be in this game.
Yeah, Shahan, Mark Fletcher went off against Texas A&M, and not to say that's like a surprise, but he's someone they haven't fed the ball to 20 times a game at Miami. But how important is it for them to have this run game going with Mark Fletcher and the way he performed against a very good Texas A&M defensive front, going against an Ohio State defensive front that's just as formidable, if not better?
No, it's absolutely huge. And, Chris mentioned it. That offensive line of Miami is as good as any in college football right now, but they haven't been a team that's been very aggressive in the run game this year. You even saw in the first half of that game against Texas A&M, frankly, they got a little bit too cute. I don't know why Mark Fletcher didn't run the ball 25 times on a day where it was so windy that Carson Beck wasn't able to throw at a high level. Like, that's something that we should have seen from this team. And that's certainly, I think, a mistake that Shannon Dawson, the offensive coordinator there, made. But this is what's so interesting about this game is that I don't know that we've seen a full 4 quarters of Miami's best. And we've alluded to the trenches a lot of times. I mean, this is as good of a trench battle as you're going to see in the college football playoffs. You've got unanimous All-Americans on both defensive lines in Ruben Bain and also Caden McDonald for Ohio State. And then you've also got a unanimous All-American in Francis Mauigoa as well. So if Mark Fletcher's able to be that difference maker as a rusher, I mean, that is a game changer for this Miami team. And this is a defense that absolutely is good enough to stack up. You go back to that Ohio State versus Indiana game. That was really the first time all season that a team has been able to really get after Ohio State's offensive line. This, to me, might be an even better pass rush than what Indiana brings to the table.
All right, and Oregon versus Texas Tech will open us up on New Year's Day at 11 a.m. I think that's Central Time. I'm a Central Time guy, so that's what's showing up for me right now. But live, you're going to wake up groggy and maybe get some good football. Oregon, the Will Stein, their offensive coordinator, playing kind of dual roles here. He just got hired as the Kentucky head coach, so you wonder if that'll affect him or whatever. Probably not. But I think the big thing here, when we talk about Oregon against Tech, Oregon's defense. Was that just a matter in the James Madison game late that they're just putting in backups and everything, or is there concern here going against this Texas Tech offense?
I think there's a little bit of concern. I mean, I think that this Texas Tech offense has become a little bit undervalued because of some of the struggles that they had against BYU. But this is an offense that is able to be really explosive, especially on the back end. And I think that what you have to be a little concerned by if you're Oregon is that you weren't just able to kind of physically put James Madison away in the front seven. This is a Texas Tech offensive line that's improved a lot over the course of the year, especially behind running back Cam Dickey in the second half of the season. And I also expect a much healthier Baron Morton in this game. We haven't really seen him at full strength since the first half of the season. So I think that there are absolutely some reasons to be concerned if you're Oregon's defense, though at the same time, I mean, look, Dan Lanning is one of the great defensive coaches in college football. I expect him to be ready, but there are, I think, a few soft spots and holes on this team.
Yeah, you look at Texas Tech. They have struggled in the red zone offensively. They're the worst playoff team remaining in the red zone offense as far as TD percentage inside the red zone. But Oregon's defense, the worst in the playoff remaining in touchdown percentage allowed in the red zone with their defense. So fascinating matchup here. Something's got to give. Something's got to break. Hummer, here real quick, what storyline really sticks out to you in this game between Tech and Oregon?
I think this is college football's best front seven in Texas Tech versus the fastest team in college football in Oregon. That's the reality of the matchup, and it'll be interesting to see how Texas Tech handles that. Like, Oregon is a different animal than what they've seen all year in the Big 12. I think Texas Tech is equipped to stay in this game, and I picked them to win this game. But it'll be very interesting to see how Texas Tech adjusts to that kind of speed and difference that Oregon brings to the field compared to everybody else they've played. If I'm also looking at an area, you mentioned red zone percentage. Texas Tech and Oregon are two of the best teams at creating explosive plays in the country. I believe they're 1 and 3 nationally in plays of 20 plus yards. Their defenses also happen to be, I believe, 1 and 2 nationally in preventing those plays. So these are two teams that thrive on the explosive play, but also don't allow a lot of them on the other side. I think this game is going to be determined by one, who scores a little bit better in the red zone, but two, who can actually bust those plays. These teams have been ultra reliant on those big plays all season to create chunk yardage. And one of these teams is going to have more of them than the other. And I think that's the team that probably wins, unless Texas Tech forces 3 turnovers like it has basically all year.
Yeah, I would argue this is the best matchup in the playoffs we've had. Maybe we'll end up having, to be quite honest. It's so interesting, the weaknesses and the strengths going against each other. Couldn't have asked for a better matchup, at least on paper. Okay, we're going to hit a break here real quick. We're going to hit the other two quarterfinal games, starting with that Rose Bowl game against Alabama and Indiana. College Football Insiders are back. We're going to hit on the two last quarterfinal games of the college football playoff. Starting on New Year's Day, the Rose Bowl, Alabama and Indiana. I can't wait to see those helmets. I don't know if Alabama's going to put a rose on theirs. Will they? I mean, Indiana will. I doubt it. We'll see. Okay, so Indiana comes in this game just with the marvelous season, a marvelous defense. My question, though, for Indiana, that defensive front, which has just been stellar, they're going to be without Stephen Daly. We know that after his injury in the Big Ten championship game. They're also going to be without Kellen Wyatt, who was lost, I think, in late October. You look at their numbers, they combined for 27 tackles for loss this season and 8 sacks. But does that really matter considering Alabama just can't run the freaking ball? And also, how much does this game just really going to reside on just how well Ty Simpson plays at quarterback for the Tide? Chris.
No, I mean,
well, first, I want to say, can you imagine explaining to Nick Saban 4 years ago that Alabama would be playing a college football playoff game against Kurt Cignetti and Indiana, and they would be a touchdown underdog? It's just, I don't think we talk enough about how remarkable this Indiana story is. But as for the matchup itself, I do have some serious concerns about Alabama's ability to run the ball in this game, as you said, Brandon. This is a team that's struggled all season in that regard. I know some of that has been with Jan Miller suffering from injuries, but I think they're 72nd nationally in rushing success rate. And Indiana has been one of the top 5 run defenses in the country all season without question. So I think this is just going to be continuation of what we've seen most of the second half of the year for Alabama. It's going to be Ty Simpson having to carry the team and play his best football. We saw him play really well in the first round against Oklahoma for the most part, maybe after a slow start for him. But we're going to have to see Ty Simpson play absolute elite football. Like, I'm going to get drafted in the first round football, which I think is still a possibility for Ty Simpson. But that's another conversation depending on how he plays in the playoff. And if he plays that way, Alabama has a chance. If not, like, it just feels so weird to say, like, Indiana has the advantage in almost every area of this game. They've been the more consistent team. So that's what I'm watching.
It's remarkable that Alabama, I think, has -3 yards combined rushing in 2 postseason games. And here they are in the quarterfinals of the college football playoff. And to your point, Chris, we talk a lot about, like, people look at this, and I think everybody's still looking at the name brands going, you know, Alabama's got a shot in this. But if you really look at it and dissect it, you're like, Indiana should win this game by double digits. Shahan, is that accurate to say? Are we kind of having some brand bias here when we try to break down this game?
No, I think that's a huge part of it, right? I mean, this is an Indiana team that went on the road and beat an Oregon team that we all know is top 5 in talent. They obviously beat Ohio State, the reigning national champions, in the Big Ten title game. Like, you can't make the case this year that this team is unproven, like you did with Indiana heading into the playoff last year. And especially, I mean, again, I think that it's really important to go back to those defensive metrics that Indiana brings to the table. Like, this is arguably the best defense that Alabama will play all year. And on the other side of the ball, they got the Heisman Trophy winner in Fernando Mendoza, right? Like, this is going to be a lot like that Oklahoma game. But if that Oklahoma team was really, really good on offense, you look at Fernando Mendoza in the biggest moments of the year, leads that game-winning drive against Penn State, has the huge pass on 3rd down for 33 yards in the Big Ten title game to ice that game. Like, he has just been nails in these big moments. And I actually think that the most important player in this game might be their running back, Roman Hemby. If he's able to break tackles and move the ball at a high level, I just don't know how Alabama possibly hangs in this game.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. As you said, I mean, this Indiana team just seems to have the matchup advantage at every single spot against Alabama. And the fact that those words just came out of my mouth in 2025, if you've told me that 2 years ago, I've been like, are we talking about basketball? Because I know Alabama basketball is getting better, and Indiana, it's just
They're the
it's
better team
insane.
right now.
Exactly. It's insane. So let's move on. Ole Miss, Georgia, our final game in the college football playoff quarterfinals. Yeah, another rematch from the regular season for Ole Miss. They played Tulane in the first round after beating them previously in the regular season, and they played Georgia on the road in a game that they led going into the fourth quarter, but allowed, I think, 17 unanswered points, and Georgia ended up pulling away and winning that game. Georgia's defense has gotten a lot better since that game. In fact, they have only allowed 29 combined points in the last 4 games. And remember, they allowed 35 against Ole Miss in that matchup a month and a half ago. Guys, when we look at this matchup, how important is it that this is obviously a game where they have faced off before, they kind of know their tendencies, and which team does that favor? I know my answer, but I'll start with you, Shahan. Who has the edge here in the rematch?
No, I think in rematches, so much of the time, like you're alluding to, it comes down to coaching advantage. And I don't know how you can go any other direction but Kirby Smart in that spot. Of course, in that first game, I believe that Ole Miss scored 33 points. It was a really good effort by them. But I think that this Georgia team has improved as much as any over the course of the season. You see what they do in that SEC title game. You see what they do to close the year, holding Texas to 10 points. And if you're telling me that you get a whole game's worth of tape on Trinidad Chambliss and this Ole Miss offense, I don't love that if I'm Ole Miss. Now, look, it's going to help the other direction as well. I think that this Georgia offense certainly has some holes, and Pete Golding and his staff have done a really good job, but I think that personnel is also something that's really going to come to the forefront. I just think that Georgia is better at so many levels of the field. So this was a close game the first time around. I don't know if it will be the second time.
Yeah, Kirby's had the best in-game adjustments of any coach in college football this year. I even go back to when they lost to Alabama at home earlier in the year. The second half adjustments where they got back in the game defensively were phenomenal. It's just they called some weird plays offensively. I just didn't quite understand. But Chris, when you look at Ole Miss and what they've done under Pete Golding, as much pressure as there can be on a head coach, now he's the head coach, but now it's going to be on him. Can you slow down this Georgia offense that you could not slow down the fourth quarter last time on the road? What does Pete Golding have up his sleeve defensively for Georgia?
Well, I wanted to say first, I just remember talking to a couple of people at Ole Miss's staff after these two teams played the first time, and there was a lot of frustration among that staff because they felt like they had Georgia on the ropes. They felt like they should have beat Georgia. They just didn't make enough plays down the stretch. I think the problem for Ole Miss in that regard is they were talking about that like we didn't make enough offensive plays down the stretch, when in reality the problem is the defense gave up. What did they give up in that game? It was like 43 points, and they just got
35. They led 35-26 heading into the fourth quarter.
Yeah, and I think Georgia's defense is so much better than it was at that point in the season. And I think there are a lot of obvious questions about Ole Miss's offense and its ability to kind of stop the football with all the coaching changes, even with Pete Golding still there. I just think this becomes a really difficult game. There's no Trinidad Chambliss had limited film at that point when he played Georgia as well. Like, there's just a lot more out there for Georgia to kind of sink its teeth into. No dog pun intended there. I apologize, but like this is a Georgia team that has the advantage in most areas talent wise, and I think Ole Miss had its shot earlier this year, and they kind of missed. And I think it's going to be very difficult the second time to kind of handle that. I think Pete Golden's going to throw a lot at Georgia and Gunnar Stockton. Like, that's what he does defensively, but personnel wise, it's a tough matchup for Ole Miss. And frankly, given everything that's going on around Ole Miss, they handled the distractions really nicely in the first round. I think it's a difficult path for them to win in this game.
Yeah, Georgia's defense, the last 4 games, they have doubled their sack production from the rest of the season. They're averaging 2.3 sacks per game now after only doing 1.2 in the previous games this season. I remember writing about that after they beat Alabama. Like, Georgia's not going to win a national championship unless they start getting to the quarterback, because they weren't getting TFLs in the run game or sacks. And now they're getting that, and you see Georgia just absolutely handling its business. They're right now my pick to win the national championship based off of their draw. We'll see what happens. Okay, gentlemen, we're going to hit a break here, and when we come back, the transfer portal is not open, But we've got a lot of big names saying they're going to enter the portal when it opens up January 2nd. Hello, I'm Brandon Marcello. Welcome back to College Football Insiders. The transfer portal doesn't open until Friday, but we've got a lot of players already making their intentions known that they're going to enter the transfer portal. And earlier today was the biggest name yet. Auburn receiver Cam Coleman, the leading receiver at Auburn this past season, is going to enter the portal. And right now, 24/7 Sports ranks him as the number one player who will enter the portal with a 5-star and a grade of 98, edging out Chaz Coleman, the edge rusher from Penn State. Chris, probably not a shocking development here that Cam Coleman entered the portal, right?
Yes and no. I've been hearing since October that Cam Coleman was going to go in the portal. The old Auburn staff certainly felt that way. I think the new Auburn staff had some optimism that they could convince him to stay. It obviously wasn't enough. I think ultimately, and this is what I've gotten consistently with Cam Coleman, is he is thinking about his draft stock next year. I think there is a thought process around for Cam Coleman and the people around Cam Coleman that he is on the same level of player as Jeremiah Smith. He just hasn't necessarily had the same level of quarterback play. And I think that's going to be the key for him wherever he goes next. He's going to go somewhere with an elite passer that can help him get drafted where his talent would suggest he could be. So that's what I'm watching out for. And ultimately, like, I think Byron Brown is a really good quarterback, and I think Byron Brown is going to end up at Auburn. But Byron is not necessarily, or hasn't been in his career thus far, an elite high-level thrower of the football. He's an amazing college quarterback, but I certainly think that factored in. So that's what I would think about when you're watching Cam Coleman go through this process. Like, if you're going to wonder where he could go, look at the teams with the best quarterbacks.
Do you blame your quarterback for drop passes and fumbling the ball? Cam Coleman did that a lot this past season. I'm not trying to. I mean, listen, Cam Coleman is a 4 to 5 star type guy. There's no doubt the talent. But man, he dropped a lot of balls this year, a lot of them. But he's going to get a lot of interest.
Yeah,
we were talking during the break. There's no telling really who might pop up on the radar for Cam Coleman here. But going back to his high school recruiting process, Texas A&M and LSU were in the hunt among the finalists there. Of course, LSU staff's all gone away practically, and A&M right now will be an interesting situation, kind of what he thinks of Marcel Reed at quarterback there, whether that kind of fits his mold. But of course, everybody who is anybody out there is going to want a piece of Cam Coleman.
Yeah, I think that's the way to think about this. Cam Coleman is legitimately somebody who can go anywhere in the country he wants. Like, there are very few players you can say that about. He is one of them. A lot has changed since his high school recruitment. You mentioned with LSU and A&M, like, those are new staffs, but Holloman Wiggins was his lead recruiter at Alabama. He's got a really strong relationship with the wide receivers coach at Florida now, Marcus Davis. I wouldn't rule them out completely after that move. But I would be thinking about the Texas of the world, the USCs of the world, the Texas Techs of the world, given the money, and the Miamis of the world. I wouldn't even rule out a team like Ohio State. Like, I remember when I was talking to somebody about Cam Coleman last month, that was a team they brought up. Like, can you imagine Jeremiah and Cam Coleman together? I'm not reporting that is going to happen or even that's a possibility, but this is a player that can play anywhere, and it's going to be an elite quarterback situation, and it's going to be a team that can afford to pay him at an elite level. So that's what you need to be thinking about with Cam Coleman. And we'll have more information as the days go on about Cam, but he can play anywhere he wants. I can't stress that enough. Cam Coleman is really good.
Maybe Army, No,
maybe he can go to Navy. Blake Horvat is throwing the ball more than ever. But I will say this just real quick. I was talking to somebody, an old Auburn staffer, that said he used to call Cam Coleman job security because he knew as long as Cam Coleman was there, they would be there. Cam Coleman is no longer at Auburn, and they are no longer the Auburn coaching staff, obviously. But like, that's how people think about Cam Coleman. And I didn't mention them, but worth keeping an eye on Alabama. Like, he is from the state of Alabama. Alabama was a pretty significant factor in his early recruitment. I'm not saying the Coleman family will do that. Like, that would be a pretty big slap in the face to Auburn on the way out the door. But like, this is a guy who can go anywhere, and he is from that state. So just something to keep in mind.
gosh. I know that state very well. That would be just an absolute gut punch. Okay, so 3 of the top 6 players who are slated to enter the portal as of today are quarterbacks. We've talked about them before on the show. Florida quarterback DJ Lagway, Nebraska quarterback Dylan Raiola, and Cincinnati quarterback Brendan Sorsby, who, by the way, is ranked above them in the 24/7 Sports Transfer Portal rankings at number 3 with a 4-star grade of 96. Any intel on that? I think we've been hearing things about where we might think they go, but what's the latest on those 3?
Yeah, it's Sorsby. I think Texas Tech has been the school most commonly linked with him for sure, and Texas Tech is a very big part of that process. But I do think other teams have emerged there as at least teams to follow. I would put LSU in that camp, for example, as a team that is making a pretty strong push there for Sorsby. So certainly keep an eye on that one. I think people have reported it to Texas Tech like it's done, and I think there is a lot of momentum from there. But there are other teams aggressively pursuing Sorsby in the portal. The Dylan Raiola situation is interesting. The school I continue to hear he would like to go to is Oregon. Whether Oregon feels the same way, I think remains to be seen. I think there are several players that would maybe be a little bit above him in Oregon's pecking order for the quarterback situation. That is assuming Dante Moore leaves in the first place. And DJ Lagway is another interesting one. Like Baylor, Louisville are teams I've heard early on. I know like a team like Stanford would love to get him. Florida State, I've heard a little bit. But these are 2 quarterbacks that rank highly in the rankings because of their ceiling. If they hit their ceiling, they're going to be first-round draft picks. But I think both have some question marks around them in a way that like a Josh Hoover doesn't have, for example, below him in the rankings, or a Drew Mestemaker won't have when he officially announces he's going in the portal. But like the clear expectation is he will. So those 2 are highly rated, but it's worth keeping an eye on their processes because I don't think there's any like 100% certainty on them on December 29th, a couple days ahead of the portal.
Another quarterback real quick, Anthony Catalara out of UNLV, former Virginia quarterback. He's going to enter the portal after saying he wasn't going to a week ago. Now he says he's going to. I think the school to watch there is Florida State, based off of what I'm hearing so far. And if that ends up happening, Florida State will have 3 former ACC quarterbacks transferring in there to be their starting quarterback potentially. And I don't know if it's quite worked the last 2 times. I don't know if a third time would be the charm, but we'll see. We'll see there. Okay. Well, that's it for this episode of the College Football Insiders. Thank you so much for watching. Find us on YouTube and also find our work at cbssports.com. Enjoy the college football playoff quarterfinals, everybody.